I just hope he rots in hell. I never imagined he would do this to my son." Those were the trembling words of Brittany Kunzler inside the courtroom. A mother's grief turned into an accusation against the man who shattered her trust. Now let's go back to Roy, Utah, on what began as an ordinary winter morning. A quiet neighborhood, families starting their day, until one home suddenly transformed into the center of a nightmare. When first responders arrived, what they found inside was so disturbing it left even seasoned investigators shaken. What was discovered inside that house, and what truly happened in those short hours between the sound of children's laughter and the silence of death. This is not only the story of a crime, but one that raises questions that send chills through anyone who hears it. Before we continue, I need to warn you this case is heavy. We will not dwell on graphic details, but what we uncover here is heartbreaking, a betrayal of trust and failures in the very systems meant to protect children, failures no family should ever have to bear. And to those of you joining us, whether this is your first time or you've been with us through other stories, thank you. Your attention, your empathy, and your willingness to face these truths matter. Because by remembering Aleister, by refusing to look away, we honor his life, and together, we can help ensure no child's story ends the same way. Aleister Samuel Kunzler was born alongside his twin sister, Lara, and from the very first moment, the two became the heart of their family's love. Aleister was a lively little boy, obsessed with Teen Titans Go, proud of the scribbles he called art, and always clutching his stuffed cat, Puss in Boots, during every afternoon nap. By his side was Lara, quiet but steadfast, faithfully following in her brother's energetic footsteps, together with their older sister, Bella, and their grandmother, Joanne. They formed a warm circle in which Aleister's childhood was wrapped in affection and laughter. His parents, Justin and Brittany, high school sweethearts, had chosen to settle in Roy, Utah, believing it to be a safe city, a place where children could grow up surrounded by neighbors and friends, where trust was the foundation of safety. But what no one in the family realized was that this seemingly unbreakable circle of love contained a hidden gap. Informal childcare arrangements, leaving children with neighbors, friends, or familiar faces often existed outside any official oversight. For the Kunzlers, this never seemed like a danger. Trust, to them, was enough. And it was through that invisible gap that tragedy found its way in. The one who stepped through their door was Jonathan Dunn. Jonathan Allen Dunn entered the Kunzler family's life like an uncle. No blood relation, no family ties, yet welcomed as one of their own. At 36, he presented himself as an easygoing man, helpful, approachable, and seemingly fond of children. In a community that valued neighborly trust, the Kunzlers had no reason to suspect otherwise. But behind that facade lay a dangerous past. In 2017, Dunn was convicted of intentional child endangerment after a 2-year-old boy in his care suffered a broken arm and serious facial injuries. When his parole ended in late 2021, he slipped out of sight of every form of monitoring. No registration, no community alerts, no restrictions on his access to children. On paper, the Utah system treated him as a clean slate. The reality, however, was far from that. And it was through this gap that tragedy entered. Parents had no database to search, no warnings about the man they trusted with their children. A single background check, something any parent could have done, would have been enough to uncover Dunn's history. But no one thought to look. Later, the Kunzler family recalled moments when they saw Dunn play a little too rough with the kids, brushing it off as overexcitement. The tears shed back then were dismissed, tears that would later become a source of unbearable regret. Because with children, every cry is not just a fleeting reaction, it can be a warning. And when warnings are ignored, the consequences are sometimes irreversible. We never knew. We never even thought to check. That belated admission of regret became, in a sense, the heaviest sentence the family carried. The night of December 20th, 2023 began like any other when parents need a babysitter. Justin and Brittany entrusted Aleister and Lara to Jonathan Dunn, believing their children were safe in the hands of someone they knew, someone they had once considered a friend. They left with peace of mind, never imagining that within hours, silence would descend on their home and open the door to their worst nightmare. According to the investigative timeline, the evening began as a simple game. Dunn claimed he engaged the twins in fun activities, but prosecutors told a different story. Those games quickly escalated into aggression. Inside a closed house, with no other adults present, 2-year-old children, too small to resist, too small to call for help, were placed in the most vulnerable position possible. Medical reports submitted as evidence revealed that both children sustained injuries consistent with blunt force trauma. Laura suffered a head injury from impact with a hard surface. Aleister bore injuries to his head and torso, showing signs of severe impact. The clinical language in these reports, bruises consistent with non-accidental trauma, pattern injuries suggesting repeated impact, spoke to a reality no child should endure. Both had been deliberately hurt. What made it all the more chilling was the evidence that Dunn had administered medication Tylenol, cough syrup, even an over-the-counter sleep aid. He admitted he wanted to make the children drowsy, less resistant. This is a detail parents must remember if a child suddenly becomes lethargic, excessively sleepy, or shows abrupt changes in behavior after being with another adult. It is a red flag that must be investigated immediately. Perhaps most haunting was Dunn's use of the children's own toys, a foam mallet, a Nerf gun, as tools to inflict pain and exert control. Objects meant to spark laughter instead became sources of fear. In that cruel contrast lay the deepest betrayal, stealing the joy of childhood and twisting it into an instrument of oppression. By the morning of December 21st, the tragedy reached its peak. Between 8:30 and 9:00 a.m., Aleister stopped breathing. Dunn noticed something was wrong, but waited nearly an hour before calling 911 for prosecutors. That delay was not mere negligence. It was evidence of guilty knowledge. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Justin and Brittany still believed their children were safe. They had no idea that every passing minute inside that house was stripping away the last chance to save Aleister. Their trust, what should have been a safeguard, had become a deadly void. Around 9 a.m. on December 21st, when first responders arrived, the scene inside Dunn's home instantly cast a shadow of tragedy over Roy City. Aleister was found unconscious on the porch, and despite paramedics' desperate efforts to resuscitate him, the 2-year-old was pronounced dead upon arrival at the hospital. Not far away, his twin sister Laura was still breathing, but in critical condition from a brain hemorrhage. One life stolen, another hanging by a thread, leaving a void nothing could ever fill. The house was immediately sealed off, transformed into a crime scene. Police seized the foam mallet, the Nerf gun, and half-used bottles of medication, stark evidence of an undeniable chain of violence. One emergency medical worker wrote in their report, in 15 years on the job, they had never seen injuries so horrific on the body of a child. As the news spread, the Roy community, long proud of its safety and neighborly trust, was plunged into shock. Within hours, a GoFundMe campaign was launched, gathering thousands of contributions from across Utah and beyond, helping the family cover funeral expenses and Laura's medical care. Cards, messages, and prayers poured in as waves of comfort. But alongside the compassion came painful questions. How could a man with a child abuse conviction gain access so easily? How could trust, the very foundation of the community, become the doorway to tragedy? Outside the Kunzler home, a spontaneous memorial grew. Flowers lay alongside stuffed animals. The most prominent among them, a Teen Titans Go character Aleister adored. Scribbled drawings by children were taped to the fence, as if bidding farewell to a boy who had only just begun sketching his own world. The funeral became a moment of reckoning. A pastor described Aleister as a brilliant light, but far too brief, while his preschool teacher recalled the pure laughter he brought to every story time. Across the community, parents held their children tighter, whispering that this could happen to any family. Amid their devastating loss, the Kunzler family chose to transform grief into action. In a statement released through their attorney, they wrote, "We cannot bring Aleister back, but we can do everything in our power to prevent another family from suffering a tragedy that could have been avoided. We trusted without verifying. We dismissed warning signs as just rough play. We assumed the system would automatically protect our children. We were wrong." These words were not meant to invite sympathy, but to push for change. Their voice ignited discussions in the Utah legislature about a new framework nicknamed the Aleister Law, which would require anyone convicted of child abuse to register in a public database, and would expand mandatory background checks even to informal caregivers. Aleister's light was extinguished too soon, but from it another light has been lit: the awareness that trust is not enough without verification, that gaps in the system can pave the way for repeat offenses, and that protecting children is not only the duty of the law, but the responsibility of the entire community, every parent, every neighbor, every protective embrace. The investigation following Aleister's death revealed a heartbreaking paradox once tragedy had struck. Everything was carried out with meticulous precision, yet that very thoroughness only reflected the deadly gaps that had existed earlier and when there was still time to prevent it. Detective Michael Torres of the Roy City Police Department led the inquiry, working closely with the Weber County Attorney's Office and the Utah State Crime Lab. Interrogation transcripts later released showed Jonathan Dunn repeatedly changing his story at first. He claimed the children were just playing and got hurt. When confronted with evidence, he admitted he may have gone too far. And finally, Dunn confessed he had given the children medication without authorization to make them more compliant. What he never explained was why he waited nearly an hour before calling 911, a gap that prosecutors highlighted as proof of both intent and guilty knowledge. The report of medical examiner Dr. Sarah Mitchell dismantled every excuse. The pattern of injuries on Aleister and Lara made it clear this was not an accident, but violence carried out over hours. Pattern bruising, repeated trauma, even tiny defensive wounds on Aleister's arms all bore witness to the desperate effort of a 2-year-old boy trying to shield himself. The clinical language of the report was stark, but behind it lay an immeasurable truth: a child had fought for his life in vain. The investigation also uncovered that Dunn had been in contact with at least 3 other families with young children between 2017 and 2023. One family recalled that their child suddenly became fearful and withdrawn whenever Dunn was around, but they dismissed it because there was no clear evidence. The signs had been there, but no one acted. When the full truth emerged, investigators felt an even deeper ache. The machinery of justice had operated at full capacity only after a child's life had already been lost. The legal actions against Jonathan Dunn began almost immediately. In December 2023, the Weber County Attorney's Office filed the highest charges: aggravated murder, along with multiple counts related to child abuse and sexual assault. The message from the prosecution was unmistakable. This was not an accident. It was a crime carried out with intent. For months of preparation, the entire city of Roy followed every step. The courtroom became the stage where the truth was laid bare. Prosecutor Rebecca Chen pieced together every fragment of evidence, from forensic examinations and medical reports to critical witness statements. The defense tried to downplay it as an accident gone too far, but the evidence pointed to a harsher reality the consequences were far too clear to deny. On August 13, 2024, Dunn lowered his head and accepted a plea deal, choosing life in prison over the death penalty. The agreement forced him to recount his actions in detail before the court, ensuring the legal record would forever preserve the truth. Judge Noel S. Hyde handed down the sentence: life without parole for aggravated murder, 15 years to life for each count of sexual abuse, 1 to 15 years for child abuse. All sentences to be served concurrently. It was a heavy sentence, yet no punishment could ever balance the loss of a child. In the victim impact statements, Brittany Kunzler looked Dunn directly in the eye, her voice trembling yet resolute. Aleister called you uncle. He once ran into your open arms. You betrayed that trust and destroyed our lives. We will never forgive you. Justin followed. Lara still wakes up in the middle of the night with nightmares. Our eldest daughter asks why evil exists. Every birthday, every Christmas is overshadowed by the pain you caused. Dunn responded with only a shallow apology, but Judge Hyde cut through the pretense with the firm words. This was not a fleeting mistake. This was hours of deliberate violence against children who could not defend themselves. This was calculation, not error. And then, another truth surfaced in court. As far back as 2017, Dunn had already been convicted of harming a 2-year-old boy. That conviction existed within the justice system, yet it had never reached the Kunzler family. There was no mechanism for background checks on informal caregivers, a legal gap that seemed simple, but was enough to open the door to tragedy. The trial closed with a double reckoning. Dunn would spend the rest of his life behind bars, but the justice system itself was forced to face scrutiny. Justice has been carried out today, Judge Hyde concluded, but justice that comes only after the death of a child is never complete justice. When the courtroom doors closed, the Kunzler family still had to learn how to live with a void that could never be filled. The little chair where Aleister once sat remained empty. Lara continued her recovery, surrounded by love and medical care, but the nightmares and emotional scars would follow her for years to come. The Roy City community refused to let this tragedy fade into silence. They turned grief into action. Parent groups began organizing free background checks. The Aleister's Light Foundation was created, providing educational resources and lobbying for legal reform. Within just a few months, workshops had reached over 3,000 parents, teaching them how to recognize signs of abuse from unexplained injuries to unusual fear in a child around a specific adult. The weight of the Kunzler's pain sparked a ripple effect in policy. While the comprehensive Aleister law still awaited full passage, Utah took its first steps. All convictions involving harm to children must be entered into the database within 48 hours. Funding was increased for child advocacy centers, and mandatory reporter training was updated to include signs of chemical sedation in children. The Kunzler family did not stop there. They testified before legislative committees, shared their story at conferences, and advised other states. "We cannot bring Aleister back," Brittany said, "but every child protected because of our son's story carries his light forward." The campaign Trust, but Verify quickly became a community slogan. Running a background check is not an insult. Refusing transparency is what should raise concern. Even in schools, Aleister's story left its mark. Programs now teach children about personal boundaries, safe touch, and identifying trusted adults to turn to when something feels wrong. These small words carry the power to shatter silence, the same silence that once engulfed Aleister's tragedy. If this story has awakened you, please share it so that others may recognize the warning signs, because awareness is the first step to preventing tragedy. The case of Aleister Samuel Kunzler is not only an unbearable loss, but also a call for urgent action. Systemic failures, ignored warnings, misplaced trust all converge to steal the life of a child. Yet, in that darkness, the Roy community showed that grief can be transformed into a shield of protection for other children. Remember, anyone who cares for your child must be verified. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, because that discomfort always has a reason. Don't wait for undeniable proof. Reasonable suspicion is enough to act. Report, speak up, demand reform, and teach children the language to protect themselves, so they know when to say no. I still think about Aleister's scribbled drawings, bright, chaotic, full of life. They are traces of a stolen future, but also a reminder of what can still be saved. Lara is healing, but the scars of memory will remain with her for life. And that underscores why change cannot wait, not tomorrow, but today. This is not only a story about what happened, it is a warning of what can happen when vigilance fades. Don't let another Aleister slip away in silence. Be the voice, be the eyes, be the hands that act. Every call, every report, every word of caution you raise could be the line between life and death for a child.